They say a mother's love is eternal. But what about a mother's grief? Can it become a curse? A ghost that wanders the riverside forever, searching for what was lost? I came to a small town in Mexico, a place shrouded in fear and a tragedy with no end. Children were disappearing, and the locals whispered a name: La Llorona, the weeping woman. This time, I wasn't sent to fight a monster. I was sent to listen to a tragedy. This is my journey into the heart of sorrow, to confront a spirit born not of malice, but of unbearable loss. I had to find a way to soothe a ghost whose only crime, perhaps, was loving her children too much. I was in a dusty internet cafe in Mexico City, mapping out flight paths to Cairo, when the message came. The familiar, elegant encryption of a friend bloomed on my screen, but the content was stripped of all its usual cryptic coyness. It was direct, and it was raw. A deep sorrow covers a town in Mexico. Children are paying the price. This is not a test. This is a tragedy. Help them. Below the text was a name: Santa Magdalena. A small town on the banks of the Rio Animas, the River of Souls. Egypt could wait. My own quest for answers felt selfish and insignificant in the face of such a stark plea. The tests were over, my friend had said. This was something else. This was a request. I booked a bus ticket instead of a flight. Santa Magdalena was a place drowning in its own grief. The moment I stepped off the bus, I could feel it. It hung in the oppressive heat, clung to the faded paint of the colonial-style church, and was reflected in the eyes of everyone I passed. The town square, which should have been bustling, was nearly deserted, and everywhere I looked there were the posters. Taped to lampposts, pinned to community notice boards, stuck in shop windows, the smiling, innocent faces of children. Desaparecido, missing. The whispers followed me as I walked through the quiet streets. I was an outsider, a gringo, my presence an unwelcome intrusion. I heard the name spoken in hushed, fearful tones, a name I knew from the folklore section of my notebook. La Llorona, the weeping woman. A legend as old as the land itself, a ghost of a mother who drowned her children and was now cursed to search for them for all eternity, snatching any child she found near the water's edge. My professional skepticism told me it was a local boogeyman, a story used to mask a more human predator. But the town's fear was too palpable, too genuine. It was a shared, collective nightmare. As dusk began to settle, that nightmare became horrifyingly real. A frantic energy seized the town. A little boy named Mateo, only 6 years old, hadn't come home. The church bells rang, not for evening mass, but as an alarm. The entire town mobilized. A desperate army of parents and neighbors armed with flashlights and prayers. They swept through the fields, the narrow streets, and inevitably towards the river. I joined the search from a distance, an anonymous shadow, watching the beams of light cut frantically through the growing darkness along the riverbank. Hope dwindled with the fading light. By the time the moon was high in the sky, the search was called off. The desperate calls of Mateo were replaced by the quiet, heartbroken sobs of his mother. The town sank into a collective, suffocating despair. And it was in that profound silence, broken only by the sound of weeping, that I heard it. It came from the river, a long, thin wail that seemed to carry on the wind itself. It wasn't the roar of a beast or the shriek of a specter. It was the sound of pure, undiluted agony. A sound of a heart breaking over and over again for centuries. It was a sound so filled with sorrow that it bypassed fear and went straight to a cold, aching pity in my own chest. It was the cry of La Llorona, and she was still searching. Dawn brought no relief to Santa Magdalena, only a renewed, sharper sense of loss. My attempts to investigate were met with a wall of silent, stubborn resistance. I was an outsider, a gringo, and my questions felt like me prodding at a fresh wound. To them, I wasn't here to help. I was a vulture drawn by their tragedy. The local police chief, a man named Delgado with weary eyes and a perpetually grim expression, made it clear I wasn't welcome. He saw my inquiries as a slight against his competence, my presence an unnecessary complication in a town already unraveling. This is a local matter, he told me, his tone leaving no room for argument. We don't need outsiders stirring up old stories. The townspeople were even less receptive. They would cross the street to avoid me. Mothers would pull their children close as I passed. Their fear of La Llorona had intertwined with a deep-seated suspicion of strangers. In their eyes, I was a bad omen, a harbinger of more sorrow. Undeterred, I made my way to the riverbank where the search for Mateo had been concentrated. The area was marked off with a single, sad strand of yellow police tape. I ducked under it, my eyes scanning the ground. My training had taught me to look for signs of a struggle, scuff marks, broken branches, a fight for survival. But there was nothing. The scene was eerily peaceful. The only evidence that a child had ever been there was a small, brightly colored toy car, half buried in the soft mud near the water's edge. I knelt, examining it without touching. There was no blood, no sign of a predator, human or otherwise. It was as if the boy had simply vanished, led away, not dragged. The emptiness of the scene was more chilling than any sign of violence could have been. I stayed until night fell again, hoping the darkness might reveal something that daylight had missed. The town fell silent, a community locked behind its doors, praying the weeping ghost would not come for them. I walked along the river, the silver light of the moon turning the water into a rippling sheet of obsidian. Mind other bows days I'll shows. That's when her wailing began again. This time it wasn't a distant echo, it was closer. So close it felt like it was coming from the reeds just a few feet away. Ay, mis hijos. The cry was clear, a lament of pure, soul-shattering anguish. Oh, my children! My hand went to the weapon holstered at my back, a reflex born of 100 other encounters. But I didn't draw it. The sound wasn't a monster's roar. It was the cry of a mother. It was a sound of such profound, bottomless misery that it bypassed every defense I had. It was a pain that felt physical, a cold wave of despair that washed over me. I shivered, not from fear, but from an unwelcome, unexpected surge of empathy. For the first time, I wasn't facing a creature I needed to destroy. I was facing a sorrow I needed to understand. Aisha Sora Mafer's wall of silence and suspicion was impenetrable. I realized that my usual methods, observation, analysis, intimidation, were useless here. I wasn't dealing with a problem that could be solved with logic or force. I was dealing with a wound in the soul of a town, and I needed someone who understood its history. After a few quiet inquiries at the local cantina, one name kept coming up, spoken with a mixture of reverence and affection: Elena. She was the elderly woman who cared for the town's small, whitewashed church, the unofficial keeper of Santa Magdalena's history, its births, its deaths, its tragedies. I found her lighting candles in the cool, dim interior of the church. She was small and frail, her back bent with age, but her eyes were bright and sharp. She watched me approach with the same cautious suspicion as the others. "The police chief does not like you," she said, her voice soft but direct. "He says you are trouble." "I'm not here to cause trouble, Senora," I replied, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm here because children are disappearing. I heard the crying last night. I don't believe it's just a story." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. I wasn't dismissing their beliefs. I was validating them. "I'm not here to hunt it," I continued, choosing my words carefully. "I'm here to understand it, to understand her." That was the key. I had acknowledged the spirit's humanity. Elena studied me for a long moment, then gestured for me to sit in one of the worn wooden pews. She told me the story, not the famous legend known throughout Mexico, but the specific, painful history of Santa Magdalena's own weeping woman. Her name was Maria. She had lived nearly a century ago, a young woman with 2 small sons whom she adored. She wasn't a scorned lover or a woman driven mad by jealousy. Her tragedy was one of nature's cruel indifference. A flash flood, a rare but devastating event in the region, had swollen the Rio Animas into a raging monster. Her small house by the river was swept away, and her sons were torn from her arms by the current. In her madness and grief, unable to live without them, She had thrown herself into the same churning water that had taken her children. "She is not evil," Elena said, her voice heavy with an inherited sadness. "She is trapped. Her spirit is caught in that one terrible moment, replaying her loss for all eternity. She wanders the riverbank, searching, always searching." Her next words chilled me to the bone. "When she finds a child alone near the water, her broken spirit does not see a stranger's son. In her grief, she sees her own. She is not stealing them to harm them. She is leading them away in a desperate, confused attempt to save them from the water, to correct the one moment in her life that she cannot change." The truth was more tragic than any monster story. Llorona wasn't a predator. She was a ghost, chained to a memory, her love twisted by grief into a curse that now haunted the very town that mourned her. Elena's story changed everything. It provided context, a motive born of tragedy, not malice. But it also created a new question. If this happened a century ago, I asked her, my mind shifting from lore to logistics, why now? Why has she started taking children again after all this time? Elena's brow furrowed. I was right. The legend of Llorona was a part of the town's fabric, a ghost story told to keep children away from the river at night. But there hadn't been a string of disappearances like this in living memory. Her spirit had been quiet, her grief a gentle, sorrowful echo rather than an active threat. Something must have disturbed her. Something had reopened the wound. Together we began to piece together the recent history of Santa Magdalena. We sat in the back room of the church, surrounded by dusty parish records and yellowed town newspapers. We made a timeline. The first child disappeared 3 months ago. What had changed in the town around that time? Dot by 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 dot. The answer wasn't in the church records. It was in a small, overlooked article in a regional newspaper about economic development. A construction company, Desarrollos del Norte, had begun a new project just upstream from the town. They were dredging the river, widening the channel for a proposed new irrigation system. The project had started approximately 1 week before the first disappearance. It was too perfect to be a coincidence. That night, I drove upstream. The construction site was deserted, the heavy machinery silent under the moonlight like sleeping metal beasts. The air here felt different, sterile, stripped of the ancient sorrow that permeated the town. This was a place of disruption. I walked along the riverbank, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The company had dredged a massive amount of silt and rock from the riverbed, piling it high on the bank. It was a scar on the land, a raw, open wound. I began to sift through the piles of displaced earth, looking for anything out of place. It took almost an hour. My hands were caked in mud when my fingers brushed against something small and metallic. I pulled it free and wiped it clean on my trousers. It was a small, simple silver locket, tarnished and blackened with age. It was crudely made, the kind of keepsake a poor family might cherish. I pried it open with the tip of my knife. Inside, there was just enough detail left to see a faded, miniature portrait of a woman and 2 small boys. That's it. Maria and her sons. The dredging hadn't just moved silt. It had desecrated an unmarked grave. It had unearthed the one physical object that tied Maria's spirit to her children, to her loss. This locket wasn't just a piece of metal. It was an anchor. It was the physical manifestation of her memory, and by bringing it back to the surface, the construction company had chained her ghost to the most painful moment of her existence, forcing her to relive it over and over again. This was the catalyst. The moment my fingers closed around the locket, the world changed. The warm, dry air of the Mexican night was instantly replaced by a damp, bone-deep chill. The distant sound of crickets vanished, replaced by the roar of rushing water in my ears. The crying was no longer a sorrowful echo from downriver. It was right beside me, a sharp, piercing wail of immediate and unbearable pain. I looked up from the pile of dredged earth. She was there. Standing between me and the river, a shimmering, translucent figure against the moonlight. She was exactly as the legends and Elena had described. A woman in a simple, tattered white dress that seemed to be perpetually dripping water, though she left no puddles on the dry ground. Her long, black hair was plastered to her form, obscuring her face, a curtain of sorrow. My hand instinctively went to my hip, my body preparing for a fight. But she didn't move towards me. She didn't snarl or show claws. She just stood there, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs, the sound of her weeping an assault on my senses. Then, it happened. She didn't attack me physically. She attacked me with her grief. A wave of pure, concentrated emotion washed over me, so powerful it buckled my knees. It wasn't my grief. It was hers. I felt the gut-wrenching panic as the flood waters rose around her home. I felt the desperate, frantic struggle, the tiny hands slipping from her grasp in the churning, muddy water. I felt the hollow, soul-destroying emptiness of the moment she realized they were gone. It was a loss so absolute, so total, that it created its own gravity, threatening to pull me down into her abyss of despair. My training, my logic, my survival instincts, all of it was useless against this. You can't fight an emotion. You can't shoot a memory. I was drowning in her sorrow, my own sense of self beginning to fray at the edges. But through the haze of her pain, a single thought, a single memory of Elena's story, cut through. Her name was Maria. Hissel. Instead of drawing my weapon, I forced myself to my feet. I held up the tarnished silver locket, its small weight, a heavy anchor in my shaking hand. I took a step forward. "Maria," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through her wailing like a blade. The shimmering form flinched. The crying hitched. "I know," I said, my voice filled with a sincerity I didn't know I possessed. I took another step. "I know your pain." I held the locket out for her to see. "They're here. Your sons are here." I wasn't lying. In that moment, I understood that the locket was her son's, the only part of them she had left. "They're waiting for you. They want you to be at peace." The weeping stopped. For the first time in a century, the riverbank was silent. The translucent figure wavered, seemed to look from my face to the locket in my hand. And then, with a final, shuddering sigh that was not of this world, she dissolved. Not into smoke or dust, but like mist burning off in the morning sun. The cold vanished. The sound of the crickets returned. I was alone again on the riverbank. The emotional backlash hit me, and I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, utterly drained, not by a physical fight, but by the sheer, crushing weight of a mother's sorrow. The walk back to the town was a blur. The emotional exhaustion was more profound than any physical fatigue I had ever experienced. I found Elena where I had left her, sitting in a solitary pew in the silent church, a single candle burning beside her, as if she were holding a vigil for the entire town. I approached her without a word and placed the small, tarnished silver locket in her wrinkled palm. She looked at it, then up at my face, her wise old eyes understanding everything I didn't have the words to say. "You found her anchor," she whispered, her fingers closing gently around the cool metal. "You faced her grief." "I did," I confirmed, my voice still hoarse. "But I don't know what to do now. She's gone, but she's not at peace. I can still feel it. The sorrow is still here." Elena nodded slowly. "You cannot banish a ghost like Maria with force or with threats. You cannot exorcise a memory. She is not a demon to be cast out. She is a soul that needs to be guided home." She explained that simply throwing the locket back into the river would be an act of dismissal, which could even deepen the wound. The locket had to be returned, but with reverence, with ceremony. It required a ritual, not of power, but of peace, a rite of remembrance and, most importantly, of forgiveness. Not just forgiveness for Maria, but also from Maria, for the world that had caused her such pain. "We will need candles to light her way in the darkness," Elena said. her voice taking on a quiet, authoritative tone as she began to plan. "We will need cempasúchil, marigolds, the flowers of the dead, to build a bridge between our world and hers. And we will need prayer, not the loud, demanding prayers of a priest, but the quiet, heartfelt prayer of someone with a pure heart." She looked at me, someone who has seen her pain and wishes her peace. My mind immediately went to the missing children, to the grieving families. "What about the children?" I asked, the urgency returning. "Mateo and the others. Are they—" I couldn't bring myself to finish the question. "No," Elena said firmly, cutting me off. "They are not dead. Maria would never truly harm a child. They are simply lost, trapped in the niebla de tristeza, the fog of sorrow that surrounds her spirit. Her grief is so powerful that it creates a space between worlds, and the children are wandering within it, unable to find their way back." She looked from the locket in her hand to my face, her expression clear and certain. "Free her, and you will free them. Give her spirit peace, and the children will come home." The moon was a brilliant silver disk in the clear night sky, so bright it bleached the color from the landscape and cast long, sharp shadows. It laid a shimmering path across the placid surface of the Rio Animas, a road of light leading into the dark heart of the water. Elena, moving with a certainty that belied her age, led me away from the sorrowful lights of Santa Magdalena. We followed a path I hadn't seen before, one nearly reclaimed by the wilderness, until we reached a quiet, secluded bend in the river. Here, the water moved slowly, pooling in a deep, silent eddy. A massive, ancient cypress tree stood on the bank, its gnarled roots digging into the earth like the fingers of a sleeping giant. "This was where her house stood," Elena whispered, her voice barely disturbing the profound quiet. "She would have watched her sons play right here. This was her home." The oppressive chill I had felt before was absent. Instead, there was a deep, waiting stillness, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Elena worked with the quiet reverence of a priestess. From a cloth bag, she produced a handful of bright orange marigold petals, the cempasúchil, and scattered them in a wide arc at the water's edge. The vibrant color was a shocking, beautiful wound against the monochrome landscape, a bridge of life laid down for the dead. Next came a dozen small, white votive candles, which she nestled into the soft, dark mud. She lit each one with a steady hand, their small, flickering flames creating a sacred, protected space, a tiny island of warmth against the immense, indifferent darkness. With her preparations complete, Elena knelt, her old knees protesting softly. She closed her eyes and began to pray. Her voice was a low, melodic murmur, a gentle stream of Spanish flowing into the night. It wasn't the rote, recited prayer of a Sunday Mass. It was a conversation. She spoke to Maria as a woman, a mother, a neighbor. She spoke of the town's sorrow, of the love that still remembered her, of the peace that awaited her. She spoke of sons waiting in a place without floods or fear, a place of light. She was not commanding or banishing a spirit. She was comforting a grieving soul, offering a hand to guide her home from a century of wandering in the dark. After a long moment, her prayer subsided into a quiet hum. She looked at me and gave a small, solemn nod. It was my turn. I walked past the line of flickering candles, the small flames warming my face, and stood at the very edge of the water. The cool river lapped at the toes of my boots, a gentle rhythmic pulse. The silver locket, which had felt cold and dead before, now seemed to hum with a faint warmth in my hand. I had no words, no formal religion to fall back on. All I had was the raw, undiluted truth of my own experience. Closing my eyes, I didn't try to form words in my mind. Instead, I reached for the memory of the emotion I had felt at the construction site. The crushing, suffocating grief. The panic. The loss. I let the echo of Maria's pain wash over me again, but this time I didn't resist it. I let it fill the empty spaces inside me, the voids left by my own forgotten past. And then, with every ounce of will I possessed, I projected a single powerful feeling back out towards the river. Empathy. Not pity, which is the feeling of looking down on someone's pain, but empathy, the feeling of standing beside them in it. I understand. We understand. You are not alone in your sorrow. But it's time to let it go. It's time to rest now. I opened my eyes. The world seemed sharper, the moonlight brighter. I knelt slowly, my reflection a dark, wavering shape on the water's surface. I didn't throw the locket. I didn't drop it. I gently, reverently, placed it on the surface of the river. It floated for a heart-stopping second, a tiny silver boat on a sea of night. Then, with a final, silent grace, it broke the surface tension and began its slow, spiraling descent into the dark, silent depths, returning home at last. The moment it vanished from sight, a soft, ethereal mist began to rise from that very spot. It wasn't cold or menacing, but warm and white, like a breath on a winter's morning. It swirled and eddied, coalescing into a faint, vaguely human shape, the form of a woman kneeling, then slowly standing. One last mournful cry echoed across the water, but all the agony was gone. It was a sound of profound release, a deep, shuddering sigh after a century of unspeakable pain. The misty figure held its shape for a heartbeat longer, seeming to nod once towards the shore, before it gently, peacefully, dissipated into the night air. And miles downriver, as the parents of Santa Magdalena kept their heartbroken vigil, a thick silvery fog rolled in silently from the water. From its depths, one by one, small, stumbling figures began to emerge. Mateo and all the others. They were dazed, cold, and confused, as if waking from a long, sad dream, but they were whole. They were alive. They were home. The sounds of celebration drifted up from the town square, music, laughter, and joyous, tearful cries. Santa Magdalena, a town that had been drowning in grief, was now buoyant with a miraculous relief. Families were reunited. The curse was broken. The weeping had stopped. I watched from the shadow of the church bell tower, an anonymous observer to the joy I had helped bring about. I didn't need their thanks or recognition. My presence here had been a necessity, not a choice, and my part in this story was over. Later, I found myself drawn back to the river. I sat on the bank at the same quiet bend where we had performed the rite, the scorched wax of the candles, the only sign of the previous night's events. The Rio Animus flowed peacefully now, just a simple river, its ghosts finally at rest. Staring into the slow-moving water, I realized how profoundly this encounter had changed me. In Indonesia, I had fought a monster of pure rage. In Rome, a demon of desire. In Australia, I had protected a guardian. But here, in Mexico, I had done something else entirely. I had healed a wound. I hadn't won with a weapon, a trap, or a clever tactic. I had won by listening, by understanding, by sharing, for a brief, terrifying moment, in a pain that was not my own. For so long, my amnesia had been a void, a frustrating emptiness, but by experiencing the crushing weight of Maria's memories, I finally understood, in a visceral way, what it truly meant to lose your past, to lose your purpose, to lose the ones you love. Her sorrow had given my own formless loss a tangible shape. I now understood the weight of the memories I was fighting to reclaim. They weren't just data points or answers to a puzzle. They were the very essence of a life. I pulled out my phone. There were no new messages, just the old one, the one that had been waiting patiently through all these trials. AB, Egypt is waiting. Farasada Wayfe. I told Bolto, Hotel Bolo Varasad. Barano Wayfe to, AB, Hede Barasad. And for the first time, I think I truly understood. This whole journey, the tests of will, of judgment, and now of empathy. It hadn't been a random series of monster hunts. It was a curriculum, a training regimen for the soul. A friend, whoever they were, wasn't just testing me. They were reforging me. They were breaking down the weapon the agency had built and helping me become something more. Someone who could face not just a monster, but a truth. I stood up, the first light of dawn touching the horizon. I was no longer just a hunter. I was no longer just a man searching for his past. I was ready. I left Santa Magdalena as quietly as I had arrived, my bag on my shoulder and my face turned towards the rising sun. Towards Egypt. Towards the end of the beginning.